Welcome to Locally Sourced. I'm Armanda Familetti. Do you have bats in your attic? Do you have a skunk living under your porch? Who are you going to call? Well, tonight's guest knows all about what to do when wildlife decide to move in. Welcome, Frederick Manger. Welcome, Frederick.
Yeah, thank you.
You prefer to be Fred or Rick?
You can call me Fred.
Okay, great, Fred. So tell me a little bit about what you are. You're a NUCO. What does that mean?
It means Nuisance Wildlife Control Operator. And it's a designation that's given to people from the Department of Environmental Conservation.
So you have to pass a test and become licensed and know what you're doing to be a NUCO.
Absolutely.
All right. So you've been working with wildlife in a humane fashion for many years. Tell me how you got started.
Well, way back in the day, I always wanted to be a game warden living in New Jersey. As life went on and I raised a family and I seen that I couldn't pursue that particular occupation, I went for second best and I went for Nuisance Wildlife Control Operator.
Okay.
To be able to manage wildlife with human conflict.
And in a humane manner,
Absolutely.
Right? Because that doesn't always happen.
It's a passion.
You mentioned tenant animals before, or you know, when we discussed this earlier.
Yes.
And so when I was talking about the skunk under the porch and the bat in the attic and squirrels in the cupboard and chipmunks in the basement, those are what you would call tenant animals?
Absolutely.
So we have a slide on the screen that gives you an overview of some of them, and I think I see a snake. Snakes come in the house too, do they?
Yes, they do.
Tell me about that.
What happens with snakes is it happens quite often during the spring and the summer when there's a migration of mice. The mice move around.
Well, the mice come in too, right?
Well, that is the biggest challenge, is that what happens is that you have your older foundations of rock, or you have a crack in your foundation, the mice will inhabit your house.
Because it's warm?
Could not only warm, they find sources for water, and they find food as well.
Mm-hmm. And do they want to have babies? Is that?
Well, primarily that's where the tenant comes from, is because all of the animals that you see on the slide are predominantly looking for a space to be able to have their litters, like your raccoon and your squirrels. But they find a way to get into it.
They want to start a family in your house.
That's a tenant.
Oh.
They want to start it in the house.
Okay.
Because it's a lot safer.
And that goes for bats. There were squirrels and bats and all sorts of animals on that slide. They're all coming in to start a family?
Correct. I had just finished a job, matter of fact, of flying squirrels that were in an attic, which is the one on the screen. Mm-hmm. And the flying squirrels found a way to get in off of a pine tree into the roof.
Okay, so I mentioned before, do you have bats in your attic? And that's a pretty gruesome shot of bats in someone's attic.
Absolutely.
Is that typical, or is that especially awful? Because that's pretty gross. That
I would have to say that that's something that's been going on for several years.
Oh, that's not a new...
That's like a colony.
So they've had several babies and families in there.
They could all be related in one way or another.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Now, could that be going on in someone's attic and they don't know about it?
Not even a clue. The only way that they would notice that is if the bat for some reason ended up into their living room, or the bat for some reason ended up in a bedroom flying around because it came down through the attic door. When you opened up the attic door to put your seasonal equipment away,
okay,
it would actually come right down through.
So is that a problem to have bats living quietly in your attic? Should you disturb them?
Yeah, they should be taken care of. They should be humanely taken care of.
Evicted?
Evicted, yes. That's the perfect word for that.
And now how would you do that? How would you take an issue like that and fix it?
Not all circumstances are the same. It's almost a military adage, is you assess, you adapt, and you overcome.
Okay.
Every situation is different. You have to find out first as to how they're getting in and out of the house, because they go out at dark to be able to feed themselves, and then they come back before sunup.
They get out and they come in. So there are doors in your attic for them to go in and out. They've made those doors, or they were already there?
They're usually created by other animals or a debilitating situation in a home. Like, for example, a soffit gutter may come down, or a soffit is open. They'll find a way to be able to get in. If their head could fit into an opening, which is maybe less than an inch, they can get in through there and get in and out.
Okay. Now, why do they want to live in people's attics?
Is because it's safe. They have tremendous amount
Until
of
you
predators.
come, right?
Until I come.
Okay.
Until I come. See, what I do as a protocol is I'll find out where the hole is or where they're coming in and out. And I'll set up what's known as an excluder. It's a one-way unit that they can go out, but they can't come back in again.
Okay.
So as many that goes out, of which is usually all of them at night, they'll go out, they can't get back in during the day. Now they had disperse and try to find other places.
Okay, so what are the issues with bats as far as I know? Because I did have one bat in my house. He was called a bachelor bat, according to the man who showed him the door. But they carry rabies, right?
Absolutely.
So if you or your pets or your children are bitten by a rabid bat, that would be a very serious situation. So
Yes.
you might, if you find a bat or think you have bats, probably it's time to get rid of them, right?
Well, as a protocol with nuisance wildlife control under the rules and regulations and working with the health department, since they are a vector, which is known as rabies.
A vector animal?
A vector animal. There's 4 particular vector animals.
What
you
are
have You have the raccoon, the skunk, you have the bats, and also, believe it or not, the beaver. Anything that's a rodent of some sort, and the canines all carry rabies that could be transferred. It's called zoonotic diseases.
You're talking about canine, the coyotes that roam our backyards.
Right. And as well as, like I said, your raccoons. They carry the rabies, and the biggest challenge is it isn't so much that it has contact with humans. It's just that where the contact was, that could be impaled on some other people. Like, for example, let's say the bat is in a bedroom, and it's hiding in a laundry pile.
Gee, okay.
So
a vivid picture. Okay.
no matter what, we have to bring the bat to the health department to be analyzed to make sure that it didn't spread the rabies.
Okay.
Because just because it has the gene doesn't necessarily mean that it could transfer that through saliva. It has to have the rabies going through its system.
It has to be infected itself.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. What about the bats that are disappearing? In a way, seeing that many bats in one place is sort of a good thing, because aren't the bat colonies disappearing because they have a disease?
It's called Whitenose syndrome, and it's primarily with the small brown bat. And
Is that one that's around Putnam County?
There's 7 different varieties of bats.
In Putnam County?
In all of New York State.
Okay.
We have predominantly 3. We have a large brown bat, we have a small brown bat, and the other one is it slips my mind because I hardly ever see it.
So rare.
It's very rare. But it actually starting to deplete the populations of the small brown bat. So the health department, as well as the Department of Environmental Conservation, want to keep track of how many instances of the small brown bat
Right, have the
disease.
What do they call powder nose disease? Or?
Yeah, because it's actually a mold. Yeah, it's a mold or a fungus that grows on them, and then when they go out to feed, they can't feed.
Oh.
So that's how they deplete.
Okay, because actually bats are a good thing if they're not in your house, right?
They're great. They're a great asset. Actually, I build and I put in bat boxes at people's homes for the simplicity of having the bats in the area. So if you're out at night and you're enjoying yourself around the swimming pool, the bats are taking care of all the bugs.
Right. I think I heard something like a bat can eat 100,000 mosquitoes a night.
They try to eat almost
bats are
half
our
of their
friends,
weight.
except when they're in the attic.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's a misconception about bats getting hung up in your hair and whatnot. They're just going after the bugs that are hanging around you, and it just inadvertently get caught in your hair.
Oh, okay. So tell me, how would you humanely get rid of all those bats up in someone's attic?
With the extraction, with the extractor tubes, or with the.
Is that like a vacuum?
Oh, no, it's the one-way door extractor. What'll happen is I'll find the location.
You don't touch them. You just expect them to walk out on their own.
I'll leave it for 3 days, 4 days, and then I'll evaluate, I'll assess again, and to see what it is. The biggest challenge is what the bats leave. It's called guano. It's their giant toilet.
Right.
And most of the time, people don't know that they have bats in their attic or in their barn or anywhere until you start seeing a stain in their sheetrock or their plaster.
Wow.
Because it disseminates right through the plaster because of the porosity. And that's how you notice it. Now, I get many a call that I have a brown stain. I don't know if I have a leak in my roof, but I hear things squeaking and walking around. Could you come over?
So do you clean that up?
Yes.
As part of your service?
That's
I
part
hear
of
it's
the service.
really good for the compost pile, but
It is. It is, especially the beetles that are in it.
okay. So we have a slide actually of some of the different tools you use to help with humanely relieving wildlife, and the slide's up now. Can you go over some of the things that we're seeing on the screen?
On the left is predominantly what we use, the cage trap for catching a lot of mammals. We use those for like woodchucks.
There's a raccoon in there now.
There's a raccoon now.
Now, is that what's called a have-a-heart trap?
Yes, Have-a-Heart is a brand.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like Ski-Doo with the snowmobiles way back in the day.
Okay. Or Kleenex.
Right. There's many different manufacturers of the cage trap. That's why I indicated it as a cage.
Okay.
Once he goes in, he hits the trigger, and the door closes. We use the nets for catching bats that are flying around inside of a home, as well as I use the gloves if I find them up behind curtains, because that's predominantly where they want to go. Is they want to hide out in an area where there's sunlight, or so they can sleep. Okay. So it's dark. The vacuum is what we use mostly for cleaning up the attics, as well as taking out the insulation and replacing it. The picture below is the extraction tubes, or the one-way doors that we use to be able to get animals or the bats out, the mammals or the bats. The one on the right is actually a one-way cage that allows squirrels to go through, and flying squirrels. And they actually go out and they can't get back in again. Now they got to go find somewhere else, like a tree. The one on the left is what we use to be able to extract the bats. It's a sleeve. They go out through the sleeve at night and they can't get back in again. On the bottom left is a catch pole. So if you have an animal that's a nuisance animal, for example, that's in the backyard, he's acting kind of crazy, what I would do is use the catch pole. I'd take him and put him into the cage trap. Okay. And then take him off property to do whatever has to be done. Right,
because he might be rabid or sick or something.
Right, you really don't know, because
if you see a raccoon walking around at noon, there could be a problem, right? Is that
true?
There
could be, yes.
Because they're mostly nocturnal?
They are nocturnal, but there's a caveat to that. I do a lot of work in condominium complexes, and in those complexes they actually use the sewer system, the groundwater system, as a subway for themselves. So they'll come up through.
So smart.
Yeah, they are. They're extremely smart. And they'll come up through here. When we talk about humane methods, I'll bring up an issue about that. But they are quite smart.
So let me tell you about, I was really interested to have you on the show because I had a horror story. I think of this as a horror story. I came home one night, it was twilight, there was a raccoon lying in my driveway. This was a pretty close to dead raccoon, right? He was like, ugh. He wasn't doing too well. So I immediately thought, this is very unusual, maybe he has rabies, right? So I go inside and I'm hysterical practically, I'm panicking, and I call the police, the Carmel police. And I say, there's a raccoon in my driveway, it appears to be dying, I think it may be rabid, what should I do, right? And the police said, you should call this person, and they gave me the name of someone.
Anuko?
I don't remember what they said because I know nothing about this, right? All I know that there might be a rabid raccoon in my driveway. And I call the name that they gave me, the person, and I say what the situation is. And he said, okay, well, for something like $250, we'll come over and take care of it. And I thought, well, the creature is practically dead already, and $250 sounded like a lot of money, so I pushed back a little bit. And he said, well, you can take care of it yourself. You can get a shovel out of the garage and whack it in the head, which just made me feel even worse and more hysterical. And I thought, well, I don't think I can do that. Plus, what would I do with the body? And what if this is rabid? And isn't this your job to do this? And so I was getting very worried and angry.
Absolutely.
At this point.
Absolutely.
Anyways,
they're not the only one.
Yeah, to make the story short, I did pay him to come and take care of, because I didn't know what other choices I had.
Right.
And so when I told you this story, you said, oh boy, this is actually a typical story, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in a situation that might be life-threatening to me and my family, my pets, and I'm told to call one person. I don't have a choice of who I'm going to call, and that person, to me, seems to be not being very humane about how they're going to treat this animal, and maybe not even doing the right thing about alerting the health department that there's a rabid raccoon in my driveway.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what should I have done?
In a situation like that, you could either call...
First of all, don't call the police, right? Because it's really not their
Well, I won't say that, because there's a lot of police agencies that have very reputable I'm not saying that the gentleman that you work with isn't reputable.
Okay.
It just seems that the story you're telling me, it sounds as though he's not really people-friendly.
I wouldn't recommend him on Yelp. Let me put it that way.
Well, see, unfortunately, in our particular licensing as nuisance wildlife control operators, I'm going to have to put this out there, is that our particular training as a nuisance wildlife control operator is very, very minimal.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, let me talk about this problem.
I'm going to tell you why the problem was, though.
Well, but the problem was I called the wrong people. I should have called the Putnam Department of Health. And we have a screen that has all the information about the Putnam Department of Health. So day and night, you can call that number. You can go on their website.
Absolutely.
They actually have a tremendous amount of information on their website, FAQs and everything else, about what to do with a wildlife problem if you think you have one. So that would be my message. Do not call the police.
Yes.
Call the Department of Health wherever you are, because they're the ones who want to know that you have a rabid raccoon. And this man, we'll just call him the man. Who came and took care of my rabid raccoon.
Your distress situation.
My distress situation. I don't even know if he informed the Department of Health about the situation. So now you can tell what you were going to say about the licensing of NUCOs. You can be licensed, but
you're not specifically trained in all of the elements of what it really required, because what is only required at this point is to take an open book test.
Open book test. So I could take this test.
Anybody could take this test as long as you pass the test. And unfortunately, it works through attrition.
So let me show you. We're skipping a little fast with this slide, but actually you're licensed under the DEC, right? The New York State DEC. And if you want to see a list of licensed and recommended nuisance control operators, then you would go to the website of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which is there, right? And your name is there as being in Putnam County.
Yes, and my son is in there as for Dutchess.
Okay, because what I noticed is that when you go to the site, you kind of have to find your way around, animals, permits, wherever. Eventually, if you do a search, you'll see animal control. Then you'll finally see a list of all of the people assigned to different counties. So, and I think that we also have a slide of a map of all the different districts where people are assigned. There it is. So you either click on wherever you are on that state map, or you type in your county, or you just put all counties, because sometimes there is no one assigned to your particular county, but you might see Dutchess or you might see Westchester, a nearby county. And just because you're in Putnam or you're in Dutchess, you're actually licensed to cover any problem throughout the state, right?
If there's a nuisance situation in Sullivan County, I go to Sullivan County. I cover all of New York State. But the understanding is we are licensed by the state of New York for the simple fact that many, many, many years ago is that we used to be under the state. We used to work with the state. For the state.
You're employed and paid for by the state.
We used to be professional hunters and wildlife managers. But they had taken that budget away many years ago. So they created a licensing for individuals to become that, because you have a passion and you do it. It isn't so much a business entity, it's just that it's something that's a lifestyle.
Well, you do have a business, and we should name it. It's the New York Wildlife
Control.
Yes, that's pretty easy to remember.
New York Wildlife Control. Now, I don't want to mix it up. No, I don't work for the state of New York, even though the name says New York Wildlife Control. I was very fortunate to be able to get that name as my license. But I work with the state. I work directly with NCON officers, of which I'm going to explain.
Explain what an NCON officer is.
An NCON officer is an environmental conservation officer. And what he is, his duties are specifically to the wildlife and the forests and preserves of all of New York State.
So conservation is the main word, right?
Conservation is the main word. That right there, I'm a big advocate of using environmental conservation officers, which are known as ECOs. Mm-hmm. If you go to that regional map that we just had before, you'll in every one of those regions, like we are considered to be Region 3, which encompasses many counties. Then there's Region 1, which is Long Island, and Region 2, which is Manhattan and the Bronx, and so on and so forth. Each region has its own DEC hub, and they all have their own law enforcement officers. And those are the people that I tell everyone to call first, aside from the health department, is because an NCON officer has information that health department doesn't. Because they're more involved in areas, because they're always in the areas. They are the game control.
Right.
And they control what we do also, because we have manuals and we have rules and regulations.
So before I call you, I call the NCON officer?
I would recommend calling your local NCON officer or an NCON dispatch. Explain that you have a situation. Okay. And they would, I don't believe that they will recommend a wildlife agent like myself. What they might say is go to the site and find where you live and find a reputable agent from there.
Okay. So we have a slide for the NCON officers. Later on when we were going to talk about what do you do when you see someone doing something wrong.
Absolutely.
And you want to report that there's something going on. So you want to report a poacher or a polluter. Right. You call the NCON officer, right?
Absolutely.
But now you're also telling me that as part of the dead or dying rabid raccoon in your yard, you should call them as well.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
We'll get that slide in a second. I'm sure there it is. Okay. Report poachers and polluters. That's the Environmental Conservation Police. That's the NCON officers, right?
Yes. And
you can also see read all about them and everything on the New York DEC site, government/regulations, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, you might have to spend some time on that site to find things. It's not that clear. It's not as clear as the Putnam County Department of Health. Let me tell you, that was a eye-opening experience to see all the information they had there.
Once you go to that site, though, you have many things to be able to select. Mm-hmm. The one thing that you have to be concerned about is all you're looking for is the New York State DEC.gov site. Mm-hmm. The other sites may be just promotions for nucos like myself, or they may be just organizations like a wildlife control organization that makes recommendations. Always go to the government site, and the government site will give you direction as to where to go.
.gov, that's what you want to see in the sign. We're actually moving quite along very quickly here. It's surprising. So let's talk about wildlife rehabilitation.
Yes.
So let's say you find an animal in your yard or in the woods or whatever that looks like it's wounded or hurt.
Right.
What's the difference between a rehabilitator and what you do, a nuisance control operator?
As a nuisance wildlife control operator, what I do is I actually take care of the situation. I control the situation with the animal, the wildlife, and then I would bring it to a rehabber or a rehabilitator.
If it's injured or hurt?
Or injured or hurt. But I have to assess on site as to what the quality of life of that animal is. For example, raptors. Well, you have your hawks, you have your eagles, you have your all kinds. You have the Cooper's hawks. And I'll give you a perfect example of a situation. There's a bird feeder in somebody's yard. The sparrows, the cardinals are coming down, they're eating the bird food. If you have a Cooper's hawk that's sitting up in a tree watching little birds, because that's what they eat.
Right.
Cooper's hawk comes down, he hits a branch, and he's knocked out in his yard, knocked out in your yard.
Okay.
Now you would want somebody to come and say, the worst thing you could do, and as a suggestion, is leave wildlife alone.
That's the thing you should do, right?
Is leave wildlife alone.
Right. I've learned my lesson on that way a few times.
Because once you get involved with the wildlife, you really you could hurt them.
Right.
As well as...
So that Cooper's hawk might just come to on its own and fly away.
It does. But if it has a broken wing,
yeah,
I would take it to a rehab. I would take it to
So I don't take it to a rehab. I don't go on the site because we have a slide for how you contact New York State licensed rehab people. We'll get that slide up soon. There it is. So licensed people have to be licensed to be a wildlife rehabilitator. Again, you go to the DEC NewYork.gov site, and you'll see a list of them. And actually, you know, it's interesting on that site. It says, what kind of animal do you need rehabilitation? So they have birds. So I would, the Cooper's hawk is hurt. I would press that button.
Yes.
So, but you're saying don't do that. I shouldn't do that directly. I shouldn't contact the rehabilitator. I should contact you first, a nuisance control officer or operator.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. As far as methods or let's say a practice.
Yeah.
You have something that's damaged on a property. A fawn that was attacked by a coyote, and it's laying in the yard. Because this happens during the spring and summer. It happens quite often. You have the option to call a deer rehabilitator, and a deer rehabilitator will come and actually assess the deer and take the fawn.
Oh, okay.
And rehab it. Whatever it takes to rehab it.
Right, but what if it can't be? It's a goner. It's a
goner. It would have to be dispatched. The rehabber has the ability to be able to do that humanely. Everything is humane.
Right.
You have to assess it as being humane. It isn't bludgeoning. It isn't strangling. It's humane. Now, if you have a raccoon situation, for example, it's considered to be a vector animal. Now, if you go on that site, you also have vector animals. I went on just the other day because we were going through the interview, and I had at one time, many years ago, many people that do rehab for vector animals. Vector animals are animals that could carry diseases that could be transferred to humans. There's very, very few. I found only 2 in our Region 3.
Okay.
And
I know. You really, I mean, yeah, there are not a lot of rehabbers around there. And so...
You're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, you are. But let me jump to some, because we're just about out of time, but I want to be sure to talk about this. We have a couple of slides of people doing bad things. One of them is a slide of a boy with a broken arm, and another one is a slide when we see the boy with the broken arm. And so here's the point I want to make. Now, what happened here, right? This is when people take wildlife control into their own hands and they don't know what they're doing. So quickly tell us what we're doing.
Absolutely. That particular trap is a device that's used by not only the Department of Environmental Conservation for wildlife management, but also what that does is landowners are allowed. That's for beaver.
Okay, so I'm going to have to. I'm sorry to
interrupt you. He got his
arm caught. So the guy's using the wrong thing. He doesn't know what he's doing, and a little boy got his arm caught in the trap, and it broke the little boy's arm. We have another picture of a man shooting deer off his deck.
Yes.
So let's show that. We can't show that. Okay, I'm sorry. So if you've got deer in your yard and you decide you're going to take your gun and shoot it, you are breaking so many laws.
So many.
And we showed the slide before about when you're the neighbor and you see that happening.
Call an incon.
Call the police too, because they know enough to know that there's a 500-yard limit. What is it?
There's a 500-foot rule for firearms.
Yeah.
There's a 150-foot rule for bow. And it's 250 foot for a crossbow.
Okay, so anyways, call those cops on the screen that I showed earlier. We are so out of time. They're running the music. So Fred, thanks so much for coming.
I wish I could help more.
It was a pleasure. I'm sure you do a great job, whatever you do. And I hope people get a little more information about what they should do about wildlife. Thanks to the crew and everyone who watches.